Hello, I am Arkanios, and today I wanted to focus on a certain subject that's been going on around about Pokemon Sword and Shield. In a way, I am joining in on the bandwagon to hate more on Game Freak and their hilarious incompetence, though I don't want to focus on things that have been discussed to death already. That mainly being the cut to the decks, the excuses regarding the high-quality models, things like that. I will briefly touch on that in a moment, however, I wanted to focus more on some of the other things that have yet to be discussed and sort of collaborate them all together into one video, sort of as just an example of just how wrong the game is and how much of an impact it not only left on the Switch system itself, but also players in general. Now, I'm not saying this as some sort of grandiose explanation as to how the gameplay itself created a divide between the fan bases or whatever. That doesn't matter at all to me. If anything, I don't particularly care for the Pokemon series at all. The only series in general that I do like from them was Mystery Dungeon, but that is a long, buried series that I'm pretty sure will not be making a return anytime soon. So I wanted to take this approach as someone that isn't a particular fan of the series, but in the very least likes it enough to understand that it's currently at a very low point. So starting off the video first, I wanted to bring focus to the models. It was said that they were going to be upgrading them for a new console system. Now that does make proper sense. However, with the release of Blazing Flare's tweets, it's been made obvious that they rip the models directly from the Sun and Moon games. As it reads here, I've been going through the returning Pokemon models in Sword and Shield and comparing them to the ones from Sun and Moon, and so far every model I've checked has unsurprisingly been 100% identical. Further down, he does go into the minor comparisons between the other models as well, showing that some of them have been changed, and even one particular Pokemon even having a much more substantial change to the design of its face, which is all fine and dandy. I have no issue at all with them reusing the models, however, it does bring up the question, how exactly is this an upgrade to a newer system? So this is one particular point that made people a little curious and made them wonder, is it exactly as you say it is? And what exactly is stopping you from putting in the models from the other games as well? What's stopping you from having them all in? And to further cement this point from @thehorsemangler or Corre de la Torre, apologies if I mispronounced that, he goes into how, with the Sun and Moon models, or at least the 3DS models in general, they were designed for future-proofing. That way they could be more easily implemented into newer titles, and that all sounded fine and well. His post also goes into the general complexities of the models themselves and how they're very jank, to describe them in a brief sense. They work, but they also are jank. Things like transparency not really being transparency, the round models requiring many polygons in order to function and could lag the system out, and then you also have the 3D function lagging the system to all hell, and is why they had to force it off whenever you get into a swarm battle. But this is all to cement that if they were to copy it directly from the 3DS titles, then for the most part one can assume that they are very complicated models, ones that are designed in a weird way that eat up a little too much data, but in the very least work. And this is where I want to get into my first point, that is new information and is something I don't see people bringing up. This information is from @WolfosB, or WhereWolfos on Twitter, and here his post reads, "Been digging through Sword and Shield's .gfb MDL files, like zips but for individual model data, and I found out that each Pokemon has 2 copies of each model. One for the normal coloration and one for the shiny. Viewer displays things funky, but you can tell the right is shiny. Also found out that Cramorant, I'm not even sure how to pronounce that myself, has 3 separate models for each form, each of them consisting of Cramo, Pika, and Aerocuda. That means there are 6 copies of this model set. No wonder why the game is 10 gigabytes. So to put this into perspective, imagine a Pokemon, and you have that model inside of the game. Now imagine a similar model, same count of polygons, same amount of data, except this time it is a color difference. And now imagine the sex difference, say a male Pikachu and a female Pikachu. Now you have another copy of that with a shiny model. So that's 4 unique models. Well, not really unique, but copied, but 4 models inside the data. And then you have even more nonsense, like cast form is in the game, so that means that each and every single form of his also has the shiny form. So that's 4 forms, and that makes 8 models. Each and every single one is adding up to make a very, very complex and weird picture. For what someone could easily assume is just a paint job, it's now a unique model inside of the game itself, and that just speaks volumes on how silly this whole thing is. Then you also have to consider things like the Gigamax, or whatever they're called models, them also having the shiny modes as well. So those are also inside the data eating that up. And then you start to get a slightly clearer picture of why exactly they don't have all of them in. 800 Pokemon times 2, so 1,600 unique models, probably more than that. Let's be a little generous and say 1,900 maybe. That's probably way too much, but that's to account for the gender differences and things like that. And also, of course, the unique forms, like cast form and that one hula bird from Sun and Moon. It's just a giant nightmare of why is this in the game? Why is it that the models are so similar to one another, and you also have an entire copy of that model, but made for the shiny version? Now it makes sense as to why there would be unique models for the male and female, because they have physical differences, typically anyway. But this is all beginning to sound like a gigantic mess. There's way too many copies of a model to make proper justification for it. And while I wouldn't expect it to eat that much data, it still is a huge part of the game, and one that I could reasonably assume wouldn't be that light either. And then it begins to make a little bit of sense as to why they don't have all of the models. Now that could be because of complacency, incompetency, whatever you choose, but it would be obvious here that if they did decide to put them all in, one model, just isn't enough. You also have the unique sex model, you have the shiny model for both that and the other sex model, you have any form changes, so cast form, then you also have the Dynamax, Gigamax, whatever. It's just one too many. Oh, and also you have to remember the mega forms. If they were to bring those back, that would also be a whole other issue as well, just more and more and more on top of more and more. From my point of view, this is a incredibly silly position for Game Freak to be in. It's something that I have absolutely no experience with game development or modeling in, but it's something that I could decently expect wouldn't be this much of an issue. It would be kind of like, so you have Spidna, the little bear with the swirly eyes, and randomly it would have different red spots all over its body. It's complete random luck, different RNG, things like that. I don't remember what one page said, but I think it's somewhere around several hundred, maybe 1,000 different possibilities because of the slight changes. Anyway, imagine that, except now you have a unique model for each and every single slight difference. That's the kind of position we're in now. And hell, that's probably why they don't even have Spidna in the game. And then, remember that, but then you also have to double that because of the shiny color differences. It's just a giant mess. I can't see how you could feasibly do something like this. It should be something as easy as just a little paint job. It should have just the one model, and then you have the texture. But here, it's a unique model for each and every single Pokemon, the sex difference, and then the shiny mode, and some of them might have the Giga, Dynamax, whatever mode, and then that shiny mode, and then you have some other Pokemon that change their forms, and then that just becomes a whole other issue. It's like you have that one flower that blossoms during a sunny day, you have that, and the regular version, and then you have the shiny version, so that's 4 different models. The whole thing just adds up. It could be drops in a bucket, but this bucket is starting to get pretty damn full, and if you start considering all of the other Pokemon being poured into that bucket, it's gonna overflow. Something is gonna start smoking. And speaking of smoking, this is where I want to transition into the biggest issue with Sword and Shield anyway, and that is its tangent for breaking the game. There are numerous reports from really all over the globe about Sword and Shield crashing, not even being able to boot up, and in the absolute worst case, straight up corrupting the save data, and even somehow corrupting the save data of other games. Actually, no, that's not the worst case. The actual worst case would be the whole thing just breaking. Just a giant paperweight, that's all it is now. There is a paste bin that has a lot of these error reports collected in there, and I'll leave that in the description. But to give a brief insight as to what exactly is going on, let me try and briefly summarize some of the error and crash reports here. So first you have the orange screen. What happens is you either load into a tent or you just start the game up, and all of a sudden it just turns into a giant orange screen and it's just gone. You can't fix it. It's dead. One of the reports says he recovered his Switch from the orange screen and checked to make sure his other game's data was safe, but then found that Pokemon Sword wouldn't even run, and so he deleted both Pokemon's game data and the save data to be safe. And he says that his system now has busted Wi-Fi and some of the games won't work properly. There is actually a reason as to why all of this is happening, and I'll get to that in a brief moment. Next up, you also have the blue screen, similar to the orange screen. Basically, someone put their thing in the sleep mode for the night, turned it back on, and then it froze, turned into a blue screen. And this is happening across both the physical and the downloader version as well. I thought it would play some Pokemon, and when I turn my Switch, I'm hit in the face with a blue screen and can't do anything. How can you make garbage hardware that breaks so quickly? Die Nintendo. And then past that, you have other typical breakdowns, like it froze on the logo screen, put it to sleep, and then you come back and it's stuck on an error, also on the logo screen. Game freezes, it's stuck on a particular screen, you get past the error and now the game won't turn back on. Someone even saying that now Smash Bros. Is crashing. An error board and something about the motherboard being broken. And how he became a guy whose Switch was destroyed by Pokemon. Some SD card issues, saying I got an error when I tried to download Pokemon Sword. The rest of my game data also broke. My save data is safe, but I'll have to buy a new card. My Switch can no longer load my SD card. My save data is safe in the cloud, but my game data is gone. When I close Sword to check my name in Let's Go Eevee, it broke. I'm crying, it doesn't recognize my SD card. I can't play my Splatoon 2 cartridge unless I remove the SD card. Save data completely being gone, the console being wiped, Switch data being deleted, all sorts of save data just disappearing entirely if not being corrupted. And also now you have issues with Joy-Cons, some of them already having issues with them bugging out to begin with, some of them not connecting properly, some of them disconnecting. That's particularly the reason why I got a USB controller as soon as I can to stop using those pieces of junk. But here some of them are saying it's bugging out entirely, that it's only for Pokemon. One particular Joy-Con not working, the A and B buttons not working when doing particular things, booting it up and the controllers won't connect despite them being fully charged, things like that. Internet and Wi-Fi issues all across the board. There's even one particular crash that involves a cutscene where a person introduces a Rotom, and the whole thing just gone. And then down the pastebin line you also find just general crashes and other breaks, and how it says that they're common enough for just searching for Pokemon crash or Pokemon error across any sort of language will bring up a bunch of results. And finally, to end it all off, the game just not even starting. And I'm going to go into the reason as to why some of this is happening, and it's a very hilarious one actually, but a lot of people are going to say that this is going to be fixed post-launch, and I want to refute that with this. The game is released. The online version could be patched, but then you have the physical cards. Any kid or normal person can get that card, and then put it into their Switch, and they're screwed. Unless they're connected to the internet and unless they download that update to start it up, that's how it is from the get-go. So anyone who has shoddy internet, maybe they don't even have internet to begin with, they don't want to eat up their data, things like that. They'll get it for their Switch, they pop the card in, and they think, I'm just going to play it as is. I don't think there's that much I'm going to be missing. Maybe I'll turn on the internet when I want to do some trading, things like that. And the trading could happen all the way at the end of the game. Again, bunch of hypotheticals. So, you have that, the physical card, and it's busted. You can't fix that, not unless they do a mass recall. So anyone who gets that game, the physical card, and doesn't immediately update it, once these fixes come out, and mind you, I haven't heard anything about these fixes being addressed. They're just screwed. They have a faulty card that can cause all of these crashes, that can corrupt their save data, that can completely brick their Switch, crash, cause issues with the internet, all sort of things like that. And this is where I'm going to get into the why. Unfortunately, I don't know who to credit for this, but I'll read out this little excerpt here. I'll copy and paste this and post the layman's sentence. NAND is a kind of flash storage that is degenerative and only good for a certain number of read/write operations before it gives up the ghost. VM is virtual memory, virtual RAM, and is written to and read from constantly, and is basically a cache for application data. The retardation is probably obvious at this point, but basically they took the memory that has a fixed number of operations it can do before dying and gave it the job of handling the highest volume of operations and any kind of memory short of a processor cache. This kills the NAND. Too long didn't read, Sword and Shield turns your Switch into a ticking time bomb. It hastens the demise of the hardware's lifespan due to an innate flaw with the hardware itself, and the crappy programming. In other words, Sword and Shield is hastening your console's death. And too long didn't read again. Game Freak turned the NAND into a virtual RAM and it's burning through Switch systems. There is no other game that really does this. This is a giant anti-miracle, if you want to call it that, just a horrible mess. Now the Pastebin does also go into how to avoid some of these problems, but some of the recommended fixes are very lackluster and honestly a little funny in some cases. Here I'll read it out. The games are prone to crashing. These crashes and errors happen regardless of what version of the game you're playing or how, whether it be physical or digital, from SD card or internal storage, from FAT32 or XFAT card, or using an old model Switch or Switch Lite. There are multiple serious issues seemingly related to these crashes such as data loss, strange behavior from the Switch, corrupted SD cards, and worst case scenario the Switch stops working. Details are still unknown, but it's generally theorized that the crashes and other issues are related to the game's NAD access, and that you should reduce the game's access to it as little as possible. So, the best way to avoid trouble for the time being is the following. Turn off autosave. Turn on airplane mode to shut down all wireless connections. Avoid going into sleep mode while the game is running or exiting to the home menu while it runs in the background, especially while in the wild area. Additionally, if playing off an SD card, you should format it to FAT32 to reduce the chances of corruption due to the Switch's bad XFAT drivers. This doesn't totally eliminate chances though, as FAT32 cards have also been corrupted after crashes. It's suspected that the Joy-Con controls acting strange or unresponsive is a sign that your Switch may die soon. If that happens to you and it doesn't seem to be the Joy-Con itself is malfunctioning, it's probably best to stop playing Pokemon at all. Wow. A lot of these fixes, there's something that no one is generally going to think to do. Now, on Twitter and a whole bunch of other places, a lot of the shills, a lot of the die-hard fanboys, they say that all you really have to do is just turn off autosave, but that's not really the whole gist of it. It is part of the problem, but it doesn't fix the whole thing. The Joy-Con controls are especially funny because how are you going to know that it's not the Joy-Con itself? They're notoriously buggy. They frequently disconnect, they frequently don't work, and that's just with Smash Bros. Itself. Or even Legends of Zelda. Any game can have the Joy-Con just goof up because the Joy-Cons are inherently just busted. Really, I think it's all down to luck whether or not you get a pair that works well. Or, heck, you might get a pair that works the exact same as mine, but it's just consistent luck that you don't have it break down on you. So at any moment, when you're playing Pokemon Sword and Shield, if the Joy-Cons start acting up, you're screwed. I like to play on a controller. So if you're playing with that, does that minimize the chances of it breaking down, or does that just leave you in the dark because you have no idea when it's going to break down? It's all just a comically bad mess of a game. You have to wonder, is it really worth it to go through all of these hoops to risk your whole Switch to play a Pokemon game? A Pokemon game, mind you, that starting at a completely different new point, it's saying, nope, a lot of these old Pokemon, you're not getting them. A lot of these moves from the older games, you're not getting them. A lot of the mechanics from the other games, you're not getting them. This is a fresh new start. This is what we want to do now. You just have to deal with it. Is it worth it to go through all of that? And even if it did meet the standards of the previous game, is it still worth it? And no, it absolutely does not meet that standards at all. I don't think it's worth breaking my Switch at all to play a Pokemon game. There's nothing new for you. If you don't like the games as they were before, you are definitely not going to like what they are now. You like it or you don't. There is nothing here for you if you don't like it. If you love it, good for you. But what you have now is a broken, shoddy, Switch-bricking mess. To sum it all up, Game Freak screwed up. This is pathetic. This is bad. I hope you all have a good day, and if not, a wonderful night. If you do play Pokemon Sword and Shield, I hope that your Switch doesn't break, but do keep in mind, you're playing with fire. And sooner or later, if you keep messing with fire, you're probably going to get burned. Or, well, maybe literally, because who knows, maybe the Switch will catch on fire, and by God, that'll be a funny news article, wouldn't it?